Chapter 2 of Memoirs Illustrating the History of Jacobinism by Barruel, of the existence, object, and extent of the anti-Christian conspiracy. To say that there existed against the Christian religion a conspiracy of which Voltaire, d'Alembert, Frederick II, King of Prussia, and Diderot were the prime authors and instigators is not merely saying that each of them individually was an enemy and that their writings tended to the destruction of the religion of Christ, for both before and after them we have seen enemies of this same religion seeking to diffuse by their writings the venom of infidelity. France has had her Bayle and her Montesquieu, the first a true sophister, undecided in its principles, and supporting the pro and con with equal facility, but destitute of that hatred which constitutes the conspirator, and leads him to seek accomplices. The latter was but a youth when he wrote his Persian letters, and had no fixed principle against that faith, to which he was one day to do homage, by declaring that he always respected a religion, and that he looked on the gospel as the fairest gift that God had bestowed on man. England had seen her Hobbes, her Wollastons, and her Collins, with many other principles of infidelity, but each of these sophisters was impious in his own way. They sought not to league together. The Voltaire and Condorcet strongly assert the contrary. Each made his partial attack on Christianity from his own heated brain, and that is not sufficient to constitute a conspiracy. In order to prove a real conspiracy against Christianity, we must not only point out the wish to destroy, but also the secret union and correspondence in the means employed to attack, debase, and annihilate it. When, therefore, I name Voltaire and Frederic, Diderot, and d'Alembert as the chiefs of this anti-Christian conspiracy, I not only mean to shew that every individual had impiously written against Christianity, but that they had formed the wish and had secretly conjured in that wish to destroy the religion of Christ, that they had acted to in concert, sparing no political or impious art to effectuate that destruction, that they were the instigators and conductors of those secondary agents whom they had misled, and followed up their plans and projects with all that ardor and constancy which denotes the most accomplished conspirators. My proofs shall be drawn from what we may very properly term the records of the conspiracy. I mean, from their most intimate correspondence, a long time secret, or from their own assertions contained in their various writings. When Beaumarchais gave us a complete edition of Voltaire's works, with all the magnificence of the Baskerville type, either the adepts, dazzled by their success, or persuaded that the publicity of this monstrous conspiracy could only give new luster to its chief, or the editors themselves were ignorant of the fact, or concluded that, being scattered and dispersed through 40 large volumes of letters to all sorts of persons, and on all sorts of subjects, no man could at once seize the thread of a conspiracy, the work of many long years. But whatever may have been their intentions, how great soever their art in suppressing parts of the correspondence, they have not effectually done away all means of discovery. Never should I have undertaken a work of such labor, so painful and so disgusting, had I not seen the possibility and the necessity of proving from the very records of the conspirators the reality of their plots, of denouncing to all nations, with proof in hand, the men who wished to mislead them, and sought to overthrow every altar provided it was Christian. With them, the altars of London or Geneva, of Stockholm or Petersburg, were to share the same fates as those of Paris or Madrid, of Vienna or Rome, thus adding, by their fall, a new though tardy proof of the universality of this conspiracy. Such, when are their black and obscure crimes, behold them conspiring against your God, in order to undermine your sovereign and your laws. Behold them seeking to overthrow all civil society, and to extend universally the evils of the French Revolution. I know that the importance of the charge requires strong evidence and clear proofs to justify it. If then my proofs should appear too numerous, let the reader reflect on the magnitude of the charge. In all conspiracies we find a secret language, a watchword, which, though unintelligible to the vulgar, perpetually recalls the object to the mind of the conspirator. The word chosen by Voltaire must have been dictated by some friends of hatred or of frantic rage. And what words? Crush the wretch, écraser l'infâme. What a signification is attached to these three words in the mouths of Voltaire, of D'Alembert, of Frederick, and of their disciples. They mean crush Christ. Crush the religion of Christ. Crush every religion that adores Christ. O readers, restrain your indignation till you have seen the proof. When Voltaire complains that the adepts are not sufficiently united in the war which they wage against the wrench, and wishes to revive their zeal, he recalls to their minds and hopes and projects he had conceived so early as 1730, when the lieutenant of the police of Paris warned him that he would not succeed in overthrowing the Christian religion, and when he daringly answered, "We shall see that." When exulting in the success of the war and progress of the conspiracy against the wretch, he triumphs in the idea that in Geneva, Calvin's own town, there are but a few beggarly fellows who believe in the consubstantial. When he wishes during this war against the wretch to give his reasons for tolerating the Socinians, it is, he says, because Julian would have favored them, and he hates what Julian hated, and despises what he, Julian, despised. What, let us ask, is this hatred common to the Socinians and to Julian the Apostate, if not their hatred of the divinity of Christ? What is meant by the consubstantial fallen into disrepute, if not Christ? Or how can the word wretch be otherwise interpreted in the mouth of him that has said, "I am weary of hearing people repeat that 12 men have been sufficient to establish Christianity, and I will prove that it may suffice, that one may suffice to overthrow it." In the mouth of a man who, in its intrigues against the wretch, exclaims, "Could not 5 or 6 men of talents, and who rightly understood each other, succeeded after this the example of 12 scoundrels who have already succeeded?" In the mouth of this frantic infidel, can we misconceive the sense of these words? The 12 apostles are the 12 scoundrels, and their divine master a wretch. I may dwell too long on the proofs, but the charges are too heinous to pass them over slightly. All the men so much extolled by Voltaire for their ardor in crushing the wrench, are precisely those who attacked Christianity without the least decorum or decency, such as Diderot, Condorcet, Helvetius, Ferret, Boulanger, Dumarius, and others such infidels, and those whom he practically wishes d'Alembert to rally, the more effectually to crush the wretch, are the atheists, the deists, and the Spinozists. Against whom then will the atheist, the deist, and the Spinozist coalesce, but against the God of the Gospel? Voltaire proceeds to direct the zeal of the conspirators against the Holy Fathers and against those modern authors who have written in defense of the Christianity and of the diverse divinity of Christ. Both of these he wishes to see treated with the utmost contempt, and he thus writes to his adepts, "Victory is declaring for us on all sides, and I can assure you that in a short time none but the rabble will follow the standard of our enemies, and that rabble we equally contemn whether for or against us. We are a corps of brave knights, defenders of the truth, and admits none among us but men of education. Courage, brave Diderot, intrepid d'Alembert, form with my dear Damilaville, and rush forward on those fanatics, Egnaves. Pity poor Pascal, but despise Houtteville and Abadie, as such as if they were fathers of the Church." Here then is clearly seen what Voltaire means by crushing the wrench. It is to undo what the apostles have done, to hate what Julian the Apostate hated, to attack those whom the deists, the antheists, and the Spinozists always attacked. It is, in short, to rush on the Holy Fathers, or on any man who dares to defend the religion of Christ. The sense of this atrocious watchword is equally clear in the mouth of Frederick. With this royal sophister, such as Voltaire, Christianity, the Christian sect, the Christical superstition, la superstition christicole, and the wretch are all synonymous terms. With him, as with Voltaire, the wretch yielded none but poisonous weeds. The best writings against the wretch are precisely the most impious, and if any in particular deserve his highest esteem, it is that since Celsus, nothing so striking had been published against Christianity. The fact is that Boulanger, unfortunately, more known by his impiety than by his conversion, is still superior to Celsus himself. As to d'Alembert, we may see that though he seldom uses this shocking word, he was well acquainted with its meaning. This is evident by his answers to Voltaire, by the means he suggests, and by the writings he approves and seeks to circulate as fittest to crush the wrench, which writings are precisely those that most directly tend to eradicate religion from the minds of the people. We may see when wishing to shew his zeal for the progress of the conspiracy against the wench, he professes his eagerness to support Voltaire and his sorrow, and from local circumstances he cannot speak with the same freedom against Christianity. His expressions are the numberless letters hereafter quoted, will leave no more doubts of him than of Voltaire or Frederick. Such was the general adaptation of the watchword among all the conspirators. Condorcet indeed, laying aside the word wrench, positively asserts that Voltaire had sworn to crush Christianity, and Mercier says to crush Christ. That the views of the conspirators were to crush Christ is not too strong an expression. In the extent of their projects, no shadow of his worship was to remain. It is true that among the Christians they honored the Church of Rome with their chief hatred, but Lutheran and Calvin, the churches of England and of Geneva, though separated from Rome, had retained their belief of Christ, and were therefore to share the fates of the former. The whole gospel of Calvin is ridiculed by Voltaire as the fooleries of Jean Cauvin, and it is of these fooleries that he speaks when writing to D'Alembert. He says, "In Calvin's own town, Geneva, there were but a few beggarly fellows who believed in the consubstantial, that is to say, who believe in Christ. He particularly insults in the approaching fall of the Church of England when he extols the English shrews, that is, the impieties of the and when he thought himself authorized to write that in London Christ was spurned." Those disciples who paid him the homage of their philosophic science, adopting his style, writes thus: "I don't like Calvin. He was intolerant and poor. Servetus fell a victim to him, and it is a fact that he is no more spoken of at Geneva than if he had never existed. As to Luther, though he had not much wit, as is easily perceived in his writings, he did not persecute, he only loved wine and women." It is observable that for a considerable time the conspirating sophisters found particular satisfaction in their success against the Protestant churches. With what excessive joy would Voltaire write that England and Switzerland were run over with men who hated and despised Christianity, as Julian the apostate hated and despised it, and that from Geneva to Bern not a Christian was to be found. Frederick, on his side, writes with equal joy, "In our Protestant countries we go on much brisker." Such was the extent of this conspiracy. It was to overturn every altar where Christ was adored. A superficial historian might have been misled by seeing the adepts solicit more than once the recall of the Protestants into France, but at the very time that Voltaire is expressing how much he laments to see the petition made by the minister Choiseul rejected, he hastens to add, fearing that his disciples might imagine he wished to spar the Huguenots more than the Catholic. "The Huguenots and the Calvinists are not less mad than the Sobres or the Catholics, that they were even raving mad. Nay, sometimes he saw nothing more abstrabiliarious and ferocious than the Huguenots." All this was pretended zeal of the conspirators to Calvinize France was but a preparatory step to unchristianize it. With the greater ease and expedition, we may trace the grounds of their intended progress in the following words of D'Alembert to Voltaire: "For my part, I see everything in the brightest colors. Already I behold toleration established, the Protestants recalled, the priest married, confession abolished, the fanaticism crushed, without its being perceived." Fanaticism and wench in D'Alembert's mouth are synonymous. The latter is even made use of in the same letter, both meaning Christ or his whole religion crushed. There is, however, an expedition often made by Voltaire which might have left the Christians some few worshippers among the rabble. He seems a little jealous of the conquest when he writes to d'Alembert, "Both you and Damilaville must be well pleased to see the contempt into which the wretch is fallen among the better sorts of people throughout Europe. They are all we wished for, or that were necessary. We never pretended to enlighten housemaids and shoemakers. We leave them to the apostles." Again, he writes to Diderot, "Whatever you do, have your eye on the wrench. It must be destroyed among the better sort, but we may leave it to the rabble, for whom it was made." Or, when fine, he writes to Damilaville, "I can assure you that in a short time none but the rabble will follow the standard of our enemies, and the rabble will equally despise whether for or against us." Voltaire, despairing of more enlarged success, would sometimes accept the clergy and the great chamber of parliament, but in the sequel of these memoirs we shall see the conspirators actively extending their principles and instilling their hatred against Christianity into every class of men from the cottage to the throne, and not even exempting their so much despised rabble. That was Chapter 2 of Memoirs Illustrating the History of Jacobinism by Barruel. If you have enjoyed this reading and want to see more like it, please consider subscribing. It would be greatly appreciated. And on to next time for Chapter 3, The Secrecy, the Union, and the Epoch of the Conspiracy.